Friends, Canadians, countrymen, lend me your ears. We're about to delve into the wild world of international trade, where things got a little spicy, shall we say. Picture this. It's 2025, and the global trade system is already teetering on the brink. Then, like a toddler with a tower of blocks, President Trump decides to shake things up. Tariffs, my friends, tariffs everywhere. Cars, steel, aluminum, you name it, Trump slapped a tariff on it. Now you might be thinking, John, tariffs? That sounds about as thrilling as watching paint dry, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But stick with me, because these tariffs were about as welcome as a skunk at a picnic. They were designed to protect American industries, but they ended up hurting everyone, including, and perhaps especially, America's closest allies. Remember that old saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer? Well, Trump seemed to have missed that memo. These tariffs weren't just about economics. Oh no, they were a symptom of a much larger issue, the America First policy. This policy, my friends, was like that one friend who always has to be the center of attention, even if it means ruining everyone else's good time. It was all about putting American interests above everyone else's, regardless of the consequences. And the consequences, as we'll see, were significant. Buckle up, folks, because we're about to dive headfirst into the ripple effects of Trump's tariff tantrum. Now let's talk about Canada, eh? Our friendly neighbors to the north, known for their maple syrup, politeness, and, well, being really nice. Canada and the U.S. have always had a special relationship. They're like siblings, really. They share a border, a love of hockey, and a complicated history. But even siblings fight, and Trump's tariffs were like a slap in the face with a hockey glove. See, Canada relies heavily on trade with the U.S. It's like that friend who always borrows your clothes. They need it, and you're usually happy to lend it. But when you suddenly need your favorite sweater back, and they're not giving it up without a fight, things can get a little tense. The tariffs hit Canada hard. Canadian businesses were left scrambling, unsure of what to do next. Jobs were lost, prices went up, and the Canadian economy took a hit. It was like someone had spiked the maple syrup with vinegar. It just didn't taste right. The Canadians were understandably upset. They felt betrayed, like their best friend had turned on them. And they weren't alone. Trump's tariffs were causing chaos around the world, but for Canada, it was personal. This wasn't just about economics for Canada either. It was about national pride. They were tired of being treated like America's little brother, always expected to fall in line. The tariffs were a wake-up call, a sign that they needed to diversify their trade relationships and stand up for themselves, and that's exactly what they did. Now, Canada isn't exactly known for its aggressive foreign policy. They're more like the peacekeepers of the world, the ones who try to talk things out before resorting to fisticuffs. But even Canadians have their limits. Faced with Trump's tariffs, they knew they couldn't just sit back and take it. So, they did what any self-respecting nation would do. They retaliated. They imposed their own tariffs on U.S. goods, targeting products like bourbon, orange juice, and, wait for it, playing cards. This tit-for-tat tariff war was like a tennis match played with hand grenades. It was messy, unpredictable, and potentially disastrous. But amidst the chaos, something interesting happened. Canada started looking for new trading partners, countries that wouldn't slap them with tariffs at the drop of a hat. And that's where the European Union comes in. The EU, with its single market and commitment to free trade, was like a beacon of hope in a sea of protectionism. It offered Canada a chance to diversify its trade relationships, reduce its dependence on the US, and maybe, just maybe, stick it to Trump in the process. Now, we can't talk about Canada's pivot towards the EU without mentioning the man at the helm, Prime Minister Mark Carney. Carney, a former Bank of England governor, was uniquely positioned to lead Canada through this turbulent time. He was a seasoned economist, a skilled negotiator, and, crucially, he had strong ties to Europe. Think of him as Canada's very own James Bond, but instead of battling villains with gadgets, he fought economic warfare with diplomacy and free trade agreements. Carney knew that Canada needed to act fast and decisively. The tariffs were already hurting the Canadian economy, and the longer the trade war dragged on, the worse it would get. He needed to send a clear message to the world. Canada was open for business, and they weren't afraid to stand up to bullies, even if those bullies happened to be their biggest trading partner. Carney's first move was to reach out to European leaders, letting them know that Canada was eager to strengthen ties. He embarked on a whirlwind tour of European capitals, meeting with presidents, prime ministers, and even royalty. He was like a man on a mission, determined to forge new alliances and secure Canada's economic future. Section 5. A bridge over troubled water. Canada and the EU. Now, Canada and the EU weren't exactly strangers. They'd had a trade agreement in place since 2017, but it was like that dusty old board game in your attic. It was there, but nobody really used it. Trump's tariffs, however, breathed new life into this transatlantic partnership. Suddenly the EU wasn't just a distant trading partner, it was a potential lifeline for Canada. The EU, for its part, was also keen to deepen its relationship with Canada. They saw it as an opportunity to strengthen their own position in the face of growing U.S. protectionism. It was like a win-win situation. Canada got access to a massive market, and the EU got a reliable trading partner that shared its values of free trade and multilateralism. But it wasn't just about economics. Canada and the EU shared many of the same values: democracy, human rights, and a rules-based international order. They were natural allies drawn together by a common desire to promote peace, prosperity, and stability in an increasingly uncertain world. Section 6. The Art of the Deal, European-style forging new bonds. Carney's European charm offensive paid off. Trade talks between Canada and the EU intensified, and new agreements were struck. Canadian goods flowed into European markets and European investments poured into Canada. It was like a transatlantic love affair, fueled by mutual self-interest and a shared distaste for Trump's trade policies. These new partnerships weren't just about trade either. Canada and the EU deepened their cooperation in areas like climate change, security, and research and development. They were like two peas in a pod, working together to address global challenges and build a better future. The message was clear. Trump's attempts to isolate Canada had backfired spectacularly. Instead of cowing Canada into submission, he had pushed them into the arms of the EU, creating a formidable economic and political bloc that rivaled the United States in influence and reach. Section 7. The Price of Protectionism, Unintended Consequences. Now, while Canada and the EU were busy toasting their newfound friendship, back in the US, things weren't looking so rosy. Trump's tariffs, it turned out, had some rather unpleasant side effects. American businesses, faced with higher costs for imported goods, started raising prices. Consumers felt the pinch, and the economy began to slow. It was like a game of economic dominoes, with each falling tile representing another unintended consequence of Trump's trade war. But it wasn't just the economy that was hurting. Trump's tariffs also strained America's relationships with its allies. Countries like Canada, Mexico, and the EU, once considered staunch friends of the US, were now looking at America with suspicion and distrust. It was like a family Thanksgiving dinner gone wrong, with everyone arguing about politics and tariffs instead of passing the gravy. Trump's America First policy had backfired. Instead of making America great again, it had isolated the US, damaged its economy, and alienated its allies. The world was changing, and America, under Trump's leadership, seemed determined to be on the wrong side of history. Section 8. Shifting Sands, a New World Order in the Making. So, what does all of this mean for the future? Well, one thing's for sure, the global order is changing. The US, once the undisputed leader of the free world, is losing its grip. Countries are looking for new partners, new alliances, and new ways to navigate the complexities of the 21st century. Canada's pivot towards the EU is just one example of this trend. All over the world, countries are forging new partnerships, driven by a desire to reduce their dependence on the US and chart their own course. It's like watching a game of musical chairs, with everyone scrambling for a seat when the music stops. This new world order is still taking shape, and it's unclear what it will ultimately look like. But one thing is certain, it will be more multipolar, with power distributed more evenly among different countries and blocs. The US will no longer be able to dictate terms to the rest of the world. It will need to learn to cooperate, compromise, and share the stage with other global players. Section 9. The Future of Free Trade, Hope, and Uncertainty. The future of free trade also hangs in the balance. Trump's protectionist policies have shaken the foundations of the global trading system, and it's unclear whether it can recover. The World Trade Organization, once the guarantor of free trade, is struggling to remain relevant. Regional trade agreements like the one between Canada and the EU are becoming increasingly important. But amidst the uncertainty, there is also hope. The vast majority of countries still believe in the benefits of free trade. They understand that it leads to economic growth, job creation, and lower prices for consumers. The challenge now is to find ways to revitalize the global trading system, make it fairer and more inclusive, and ensure that it benefits everyone, not just a select few. Canada's experience shows that even in the face of adversity, there is always hope. By forging new partnerships, embracing multilateralism, and standing up for its values, Canada has shown that it is possible to navigate the choppy waters of global politics and emerge stronger on the other side. The future may be uncertain, but one thing is clear: the world needs more Canada.